How critical are the tempo markings in symphony in two movements? I mean, some composers steer clear of metronome marks and offer, circa or approximate tempi. However, in your piece, you've been quite prescriptive with your tempi, and at times you're asking conductors to make a difference between crotchet equals 150 to crotchet equals 144. What advice can you offer them to achieve these subtle differences?
Another great question. And they are subtle differences. So if you look, you're looking at the toccata, and there are three main tempi. Crotchet equals 150, as you said, crotchet equals 144, and crotchet equals 126. Now, they're not biblical, those tempi. In other words, if someone was to play it at the whole of the opening at, say, 156 or 146, I don't think the adjudicators are going to suddenly hold their head in pain and think, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. No, of course not. The important thing, however, is the relationship between those tempi. So, for example, the very beginning, which begins with this very dramatic etc. It's this minor third, but then it develops into this 11-note row. That's taken at 150, which is a fairly brisk tempo. When it comes to the first set of main themes, after that, you've got this rising figure which goes, and the tempo drops to 144. So whatever your first tempo is, very close, hopefully, to 150, the second tempo should just be a slight gear shift down from that. Because if you think about this figure played on cornets, if it's played that fast, it just won't articulate. It'll sound rushed, and that's not the point of the music, because there's all these kind of tempo asymmetrical rhythms which follow it, and those have to be kind of earth-rooted in a way. So, and then the second main theme, which is much more lyrical, that's 126, and again, the relationship is, you have to have the relationship between those three tempo in the right order, and approximately in the right way. That way, it will make sense musically. If you don't drop the tempo for this one, it'll just sound garbled, and it won't make any sense after the first one. So, to come back to your main point, it's not important that, well, it is important that they're as close as possible to those metronome marks, but the relationship between those metronome markings is the most important element of it.
I mean, one of my favorite sections of your work, Symphony in Two Movements, is the beautiful serene variation 3 in the second movement. And you describe this as a series of romances for solo instruments. In your opinion, is it possible to be too romantic here? What advice can you offer bands to successfully navigate this wonderfully golden section?
Yeah, well, again, it's a very good question. A very good question. I think I know what you're getting at. Okay, well, those people, if there's any conductors listening to this, as you may think there would be, when it comes to that big slow section, the climax of that, of course, is at figure 35, which is marked passionately. Now, to answer your question, the brass band as a genre, when it's playing with, let's say, full emotion, has a glorious sound, and it's a warm sound, and it's a vibrato sound, and that's fine by me. But the climax of that is also where the music becomes more diatonic and more tonally resolved. The whole of the variation that variation which leads up to that is, of course, it's marked serenely, but of course it's still got a lot of asymmetrical kind of slight dissonances and slight sort of angular intervals. So if you play them all with warm, full vibrato, you'll just lose the point. So the beginning of that slow variation is a little bit austere, and there are romances between the various instruments, but it should be checked emotionally so that the full release comes at that moment at 35, where everything builds up to that kind of thing, and then even more so. Sorry, I got my number slightly wrong. 35 is the peak of the cornet solo, but then it comes with the full tutti at 36, which again I've marked ecstatically. I have never used the word ecstatically ever in any of my music before. So you can take it that this moment can be really milked emotionally for its full worth. Yeah, need I say more?
I mean, it's wonderful that the National Brass Band Championships are held in such a prestigious hall as the Royal Albert Hall. But the Royal Albert Hall, as you know, has a unique acoustic all of its own. Do you think the acoustic will impact positively or negatively on the performances of your Symphony 2 movements?
Well, the answer to that, in short, is positively. Because the Albert Hall, of course, is a massive acoustic. It's a big hall. My symphony is what I would call a big-boned piece. It's symphonic in every aspect. So, although I'm not comparing myself to Mahler, you understand, if you were to hear a Mahler symphony in the Albert Hall, there's not much actually can beat that, because Mahler symphonies are mega in terms of the size of the orchestra, the emotional charge. Every aspect of a Mahler symphony is like that. And to hear, as I'm sure you have, and you've played in Mahler symphonies, Bob, by the way. I once heard you play the opening of Mahler 7 on the tenor tuba, and it was wonderful. Anyway, I digress. A Mahler symphony in the Albert Hall is a wonderful experience, and my symphony is a big bone piece. It's meant to be symphonic in every aspect, and that means a big musical experience. So I think it will sound fantastic. The only thing I would say for conductors is getting back to the slow variation, the long slow variation, which in itself lasts about 5 minutes. That's more chamber music kind of writing, and therefore they have to make sure that in terms of articulation and in terms of shall we say getting the ideas over clearly to the audience and I suppose to the adjudicators, they need to just think carefully about how they're going to match those particular romances between the instruments. But that's one small problem. But I think, yes, to answer your question, I can't wait to hear it in the Albert Hall.
And finally, we come to a rather contentious issue, which you mentioned just a few minutes ago, and that's the issue of vibrato and how prevalent you think it should be or will be in this. I mean, Symphony Too Much is a symphonic work. It's not quite the same as Eric Ball, is it?
No, absolutely. And I think the great thing probably about brass bands these days, and particularly the so-called top bands, because obviously they've got extremely fine players in. And incidentally, the one thing I'd say about that is, interestingly, from my old hat, as it were, when I was principal of the Royal Northern College in Manchester. So I mixed with a lot of very talented students, and of those, obviously, there were very talented brass students. A lot of those students, and indeed in your own college, Bob, the Royal Welsh, go on to play in brass bands. And now if you look at most of the top bands, they all have a smattering of students who have trained at conservatoire and therefore can adapt their style accordingly. So this particular symphony, yeah, if you play it like Eric Ball with lots of vibrato all the time, it just won't work. You have to have the idea of how a brass section maybe in a symphony orchestra would play and articulate. But then there are moments in this piece, as we've said, figure 36, which just flower into a very glorious homophonic thing that only a brass band can achieve. And those are the moments of release when vibrato becomes very important. And of course, in some of the solo work, in the solo section, of course, you can't play those cornet solo, horn solos, trombone, euphonium solos, and duet. Obviously, you can't play those without vibrato. But the challenge in this piece is for the conductor and for the players to think about style and the way they're going to relate the ideas in the performance in a coherent and emotional manner. And I'm sure we'll get some really fine performances on the day. And let's see what happens, Bob.
Well, thank you very much. On behalf of all the competing bands, the conductors, and Capital Promotions, I'd like to thank you, Eddie, for giving your time freely to offer us this valuable insight into what I think is also your best work. And I love the other ones. I actually played on Connotations with Grindthorpe. Do you remember Gerard Swartz was the conductor?
Yes, I do.
But I do think that Symphony in Two Movements is a wonderful piece. So thank you, Eddie, for coming on and giving us this talk.
Well, it's lovely to talk to you, Bob. As always, I've known you a very long time. I have huge respect for you as a musician. Let's just embrace it like that. And I'm also very grateful to Capital for actually choosing this work. It was an adventurous choice. And maybe not everybody thinks it's a good choice, but I hope that by the end of the day, when they get to know what is rather a complex work, that they will have a sense of musical satisfaction as well as the usual thing about choosing the best band. So let's see what happens and let it all go.